Only in Illinois can you commit a crime by exercising your constitutional rights.
That is State Senator Jason Plummer. Chatted with him yesterday about the status of his bill to hold harmless those who purchased firearms during the injunction that was in place for about 6 days from the Southern District of Illinois federal courts. As the legislature winds down, still no movement on that piece of legislation. Welcome back. It's Bishop on Air. Thanks for hanging out with me each and every weekday morning. The latest in litigation against Illinois' gun ban. Of course, you've got Friday's ruling out of the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals that reversed a lower court decision that has that injunction in place for 6 days before a stay was put on it. In the Southern District from Judge Stephen McGlynn against the state's gun and magazine ban on Second Amendment grounds, saying that the plaintiffs had a likelihood of success. Then it got to the Seventh Circuit, wrapped in with a bunch of other cases, and on Friday, almost a week ago, we had the Seventh Circuit drop their ruling after more than 4 months sitting on that ruling, vacating the lower court's preliminary injunction. What happens to those thousands of people that purchased firearms during that 6-day window? What happens to the thousands of people who purchased firearms under temporary restraining orders that were previously attained in state-level courts around several different counties across the state? So, the question is are those individuals going to be able to register their firearms with state police legally if this law is upheld? Well, the question of if the law is upheld is still in question because you have Thomas Magg in the Seventh Circuit filing for a en banc review. Now, what is an en banc review? It's the full court, because Friday's ruling in the Seventh Circuit was only a 3-judge panel. All right, so you had a 3-judge panel review the case and said that the state's likely to succeed on its merits. That was just a 3-judge panel. So an en banc review would bring on the entire judicial panel for the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. So we don't have the actual filing because the docket yesterday only updated to say submitted petition for rehearing en banc by Thomas Magg for appellees Timothy Jones, Jeremy Langley, and Matthew Wilson. Access to this entry, the docket says, is limited to counsel of record. Once the document's approved by the court, it'll be filed onto the court's docket as a separate entry, which will be open to the public. So we'll likely have to revisit this. But yesterday, the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals being asked to review with all of their judges this particular case based on the Second Amendment and whether or not plaintiffs have a likelihood of success and whether or not that Southern District preliminary injunction should be reinstated. That, while you've also got still pending back in the Southern District, Magg took the vagueness argument. There's been no movement on that. That was heard last month. We're still waiting on McGlynn, the judge in the Southern District, to issue a ruling on that case. But you also have still yet to see from the federal firearms licensees of Illinois, not just their motion for amendments to their complaint saying that the gun ban registry that started October 1st is unconstitutional because of 14th Amendment due process rights, and they make a whole host of arguments. The state's set to respond to that by January 31st of next year, but that's after the January 1st deadline. We're still waiting, though, for the federal firearms licensees of Illinois to file their preliminary injunction request to have McGlynn possibly enjoin the state, keep the state from enforcing the gun ban registry or delaying that January 1st deadline. Because that January 1st deadline's coming up in what? 3 weeks? No, sorry, 7 weeks? In about 7 weeks, we're going to have that January 1st deadline kick in, and that could turn people into potential felons overnight if they have more than 2 firearms that they don't register, or accessories like pistol grips that might go on an airsoft gun. And if they don't want to go on and violate their Fifth Amendment rights, they could find themselves facing criminal penalties. So obviously all of this is at play, but the latest in the litigation is that Thomas Magg has asked the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals for an en banc review. We'll likely be hearing a lot more about that as well. So that's breaking news from yesterday. Just saw it this morning when I updated the case log and saw that, and definitely wanted to get you guys as informed as possible. But again, talked with State Senator Jason Plummer yesterday about the status of his measure that he filed, months ago it seems, that would hold harmless those individuals who were just following the court's order, saying that the state can't enforce the law. So individuals seeing that ruling, reading the ruling, digesting that ruling, they decided, with, I'm sure, legal counsel maybe recommending things, and they went and purchased firearms. Well, what happens to those individuals? Plummer talks about the status of his bill, and quite frankly, pal, doesn't really seem that legislators on the Democrat side are going to let it advance.
Well, I think the governor has a huge problem on his hands. Without putting a lot of thought through it, they jammed this bill through. The courts are still kicking it back and forth, and a lot of law-abiding Illinoisans are really unsure what that does to them. I put a common sense bill forward that should easily draw bipartisan support that would not address the broader Second Amendment issue. It would just fix the concerns of Illinoisans that exercise their constitutional rights. Unfortunately, the majority party here in Springfield has elected not to move that bill forward, which just puts further stress and liability on law-abiding gun owners throughout the state. The governor's problem is, we've all seen the reporting rates, right? People aren't registering their guns. People don't like the concept of a state of Illinois registry. And I really think that common sense people, serious people that want to solve a solution, not just turn every issue into politics, needs to sit down and figure this out on behalf of the good people of Illinois.
But then I asked Senator Plummer about what happens to those thousands of people who purchased firearms during that 6-day injunction. What happens?
Well, I think that's probably a question for attorneys and prosecutors, but I think it potentially turns them into criminals. And they're not criminals. They're good people that exercise their constitutional rights. What's criminal is the way the governor is turning every issue into a partisan issue to score cheap political points because of his national ambitions. We need to take care of Illinoisans. We shouldn't be worrying about the governor's future political goals.
And again, the question also, the firearms aren't cheap. They're expensive.
These are $500, $1,000, $1,500, $4,000 firearms that people have, and they don't have a solution from their state government. Only in Illinois can you commit a crime by exercising your constitutional rights.
So again, that's State Senator Jason Plummer. Yesterday, connected with him, the second to last day of veto session for the calendar year. So his bill to essentially hold harmless those who purchased firearms during court order injunctions or temporary restraining orders, it's not advancing. Of course, they're in the Republican minority. Illinois State House is a Democratic supermajority, so you've got that to contend with. So obviously, I don't think that's going to happen. So that bill is not necessarily going to be of any assistance for January 1st. You've still got the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules set to meet in December that could take up these rules or possibly suspend them. So we'll see what happens there next month. But while all the litigation continues on Illinois' gun and magazine ban, we'll be watching all of that. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other cases that have happened this week, and we have not even touched it on this program, and this probably isn't the best place to get that type of news, but you have the U.S. Supreme Court with the Rahimi case. That's at play. You've got Texas appeals courts dealing with the pistol brace rule. So all of those things happening in different jurisdictions, but here we're just going to focus on what's going on in Illinois, all right? So also when it comes to the gun issue, something that doesn't appear to be moving is that measure that would require police to confiscate orders of protection subjects' firearms. So if you are the subject of a domestic violence order of protection, which you're not convicted of anything, it's just a preliminary finding by a judge, then a judge would order police to confiscate your firearms. That measure is not advancing. We'll see. Of course, we've got 1 day left of fall veto session. But some other things that did advance. Interesting here, you've got a whole host of measures moving forward. We'll touch on all of the different things with the state's gun and magazine ban and keep track of what's happening there. But State Representative Will Guzzardi, he had an interesting statement that he posted, a Democrat from Chicago. He shared his thoughts about what's going on with a mandatory minimum for gun violations. Apparently, the Senate, they went ahead and grabbed Guzzardi's bill about the environment. I think it had to do with making sure that you can curb pollution. But with Guzzardi's bill, they went ahead in the Senate, they grabbed it, they gutted it, and then they replaced it with increasing mandatory minimums. And I want to pull this up for you. This is State Representative Will Guzzardi's Twitter account, where he makes this statement about a measure that looks to at least pass the Senate and could come up in the House, but he says he's not going to advance it. And this deals with a measure to require stiffer sentences for gun possession violations. He said in a statement earlier this morning, leadership in the Illinois Senate took control of an environmental protection bill I sponsored, House Bill 1440. They removed the pesticide regulations and changed it to become a mandatory minimum sentencing extension for simple gun possession. Repeat that. The Democrat Senate leadership took Guzzardi's House bill dealing with pesticides, gutted it, and replaced it with language to become a mandatory minimum sentencing extension for simple gun possession. The Democrat from Chicago, Will Guzzardi, says that measure passed the Senate and is now awaiting action in the House. He says, "Let me be clear, I strongly oppose sentencing enhancements with no proven benefit to public safety. The data of this particular measure is indisputable. It has increased mass incarceration and has not reduced gun violence. I will not be advancing this measure and will not call for a vote in the House during veto session." So Will Guzzardi, Democrat from Chicago, seeing his bill being gut and replaced, and then, being a mandatory minimum for simple gun possession bill that passed the Senate. But you had another bill that also advanced the Senate dealing with a whole host of different extensions and, redefinitions of things. Senator Bill Cunningham on the Senate floor yesterday dealing with one measure.
Extends a repeal date for the state police regarding the awarding of grants. It makes changes to the Crimes Victims Compensation Act to allow multiple applicants to receive repayment for burial expenses, aligns some definitions for foster family homes and qualified residential treatment programs for the Child Care Act. And as I mentioned previously, it adds a provision that extends a surcharge for prepaid phone cards in the city of Chicago to help pay for 911 services. I know of no opposition to the bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So there's a lot there, right? And these are these omnibus trailer cleanup bills. And you heard there's several sunset extensions and whatnot. We'll talk about sunset extensions coming up in the next segment because they're apparently not going to be extending the Invest in Kids school scholarship sunset, but they'll, increase the sunset for police grants to various agencies. They'll increase the sunset for some court reporter law, but when it comes to school choice, apparently that's not going to happen before the end of fall veto session. But one thing that this bill did do that State Senator Steve McClure pointed out that he had a problem with deals with firearms.
A sunset extension for penalty enhancements for firearm-related offenses, and that's been taken out of this legislation. So why has that been removed from the legislation?
That is correct, Senator. A decision's been made that it would be better if that provision ran as a standalone bill. So it is no longer in this omnibus piece of legislation.
So are we going to hear that bill today? Do you know?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
All right, so there you go. That's kind of how some of the sausage is made at the State House. It is Bishop on Air. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Greg Bishop, and be sure to tune in each and every weekday morning. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Just search around. You can find me, again, Bishop on Air, all one word, or you can email me, bishoponair@gmail.com. Hey!